Welcome to Native Exiles, Alderwood Community Church's podcast, where we talk about following Jesus and the tension of being in the world, but not of it. We have a fantastic guest for you today, Patrick Miller, co-author of Truth Over Tribe, and also his latest book, Joyful Outsiders, is joining us today for a conversation about what it looks like to represent Jesus in a world where Christians so often feel that we're outsiders, and avoiding some of the easy pitfalls of that, of just conforming to our culture or completely raging against the culture. And we're trying to figure out how we can actually have joy in being outsiders, how we can hold the tension of what life is like for that. And so, man, if you live in the modern world today, I think you're going to get a lot out of this episode. Let's get into it. Patrick, it's great to be with you. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to jump into this today. You just come out with a new book called Joyful Outsiders. For people who don't immediately grasp what the title of that book is getting at, what's the reason why your book is called that?
Well, I think anybody who's listening to this has probably at some point in the last 10 years had the sensation that you feel more like an outsider today than you did 10 years ago. You feel more out of place. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's with family members, and you feel out of place. You feel like an outsider in part because you're trying to follow Jesus. And I don't think that's anything new for Christians. Even though for some of us it feels kind of new, the reality is this has been the case for Christians throughout time. You go back to the days of Abraham, God calls him from Babylon to come live in the land of Canaan, where he's a nomad, he's an outsider. You think about the ancient Israelites who lived in Egypt as slaves. They didn't have any power. They weren't cultural insiders. They were outsiders. And if you go throughout Israel's history, even when they have their own nation, the prophets who represent God, they were outsiders because the nation was worshiping the idols. And then, of course, Israel goes off. They live in exile in Babylon. They're outsiders in Babylon. And of course, you get to the New Testament, and Peter calls New Testament followers of Jesus who are living in their own homeland, right? They're this kind of modern day Turkey region. He says, you guys are exiles. And so he's telling them, you are outsiders. Even though you're natives, even though you speak the language, even though you grew up there, you're outsiders. And so the primary question that comes before us is not whether or not I will be an outsider. This is part of discipleship. The question is, what kind of outsider will I be?
Yeah, that's so good. Because I think, yeah, if your book was just called Outsiders, I think
Yeah.
I think a lot of Christians would be like, yes, this makes sense. Like, this is my experience. But like, should we be joyful about being outsiders? I mean, or is that, because I think, I mean, for so many of us, resonate 100% with the fact that we are outsiders, but
Yeah.
probably the initial emotional reaction to that is not joy. It's fear, anxiety, maybe anger, some sense of mourning because of the feeling like it shouldn't be this way. It wasn't this way at one point, and things were better when it wasn't, and now we're in this kind of hopeless situation. So where's the joy part of that come from?
I think that's a great question. And I would actually look at the example of Jesus. You know, he was the king of heaven, sitting on the throne of heaven, and he chose to come to earth. But he didn't come to earth in the halls of Rome and the halls of power. He came as the child of peasants. He had no power, he had no influence. And that's where he chose. I mean, this wasn't an accident. It was like, oh, shoot, I woke up in the wrong womb today. No, the reality was he chose to be the child of Joseph and Mary. And Jesus, throughout his life, was an outsider. He literally had to go on the run from a murderous king named Herod for a time in his life. But even as a teacher and a rabbi, the Pharisees treated him as outsiders, the Sadducees, even the Romans, they treated him as an outsider. And in the book of Hebrews, it talks about the reason why he went to the cross. And it's fascinating because in other places in Hebrews, it says that he was crucified as an outsider outside the gate. In other words, it's trying to highlight this idea that Jesus was in effect exiled from his own city, exiled by his own people. You think about John 1:11, where it says that Jesus came to those who were his own, but they did not know him. They did not recognize him or receive him as he was. And in Hebrews 13, it says that Jesus was crucified outside the gate. Why? Well, you have to go back to Hebrews 12, where we learn why Jesus was crucified. And the author doesn't say it was out of obedience, although it was. He doesn't say it was out of duty, although it certainly was that as well. He says that in Hebrews 12, he was crucified for the joy that was set before him.
Yeah.
In other words, Jesus chose to be crucified, to become an outsider for the sake of joy. He knew that on the other side of death was life. Then on the other side of death was joy. This is